Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming out today. It's a great day to be a Republican when you have a presidential candidate who's talking about cutting $1 trillion in year one from the federal budget. And I think we all know that's something America desperately needs if we're going to make it in the coming years. 5 federal departments Congressman Paul's talking about eliminating. These are the things that we structurally have to do if we're going to maintain our republic and bring home those troops that aren't used to defend the country but are used in more of a defense of other nations. So please join me in welcoming the Thomas Jefferson of our day, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you for coming out. This is very nice to visit with you today. I do have one member of my family with me today. My wife comes on many trips. She's not with me today, but I have one of our 18 grandchildren, and that is Lisa. She's sitting over here. But I do appreciate you coming out, and of course I consider what we're doing right now as being very, very important, because our country has to make a decision on what we're going to do in the coming future, the near future. It used to be a distant future, but now it's the near future. There was a thing that many of us have said, and I'm sure you have felt this way. You know, we shouldn't be giving this huge debt and this burden to our children and our grandchildren. But you know, I don't say that so much anymore because we're it right now. We're seeing the consequence of many, many decades of spending too much, allowing our government to grow, allowing our liberties to be undermined, allowing our military to do so many things it shouldn't be doing, and neglecting the things it should be doing. So for too long, we have allowed our Congress to act in an unconstitutional manner. We've allowed our executive branch to be unconstitutional, and the judicial system. We've gotten into this mess, I believe, because we have not had enough people who understood, believed, and took seriously their oath of office. If we have the right people in Washington and only elect a president and a Congress who sincerely believe in our Constitution, as the only way I see us getting back to where we belong. You know, most of you know I'm a physician, and I went through medical school in late 50s and early 60s. Went into OBGYN and for many years practiced medicine. But even in my early years in medical school and medical training, I got fascinated with reading economic policy. Somebody said, well, why did you do that? And I said, well, it was sort of like a hobby. Some people go fishing and other things, but I just enjoyed trying to figure out why you have inflation, why you have business cycle, why you have a Federal Reserve, and became so fascinated. But those individuals who explained the free market, it turned out they were right, and they made a lot of predictions. For instance, way back when after World War II was over, they devised a monetary system called the Bretton Woods Agreement. Nobody was to have a true gold standard, but we would have a partial gold standard. And our country was the wealthiest, and we had 700 and some million ounces of gold, more than any other country ever held. So they said, well, the dollar will be as good as the gold, so all the other currencies will be connected to the dollar. And they thought that meant that it would be as good as gold forever. But there was one man by the name of Henry Hazlitt in 1944, when they set this up, he says it won't work. The governments will be tempted, in particular our government, to print too much money. And they did that. So more dollars were printed. We gave a lot of money away at foreign aid. The money went overseas. And the commitment was that anybody that turned in $35 could get an ounce of gold. If you were a foreigner, if you were an American, and you weren't even allowed to own gold. So anyway, that happened, and our gold supply went from over 700 million ounces of gold down to under 300 million ounces of gold. And that happened in 1971. Richard Nixon said, no more gold standard. He eliminated the gold standard with an executive order. And it was on that day that it dawned on me what age we were ushering in. And it was when I started talking out about the economic system. And that to me, I was convinced that the Austrian free market economists were right. The predictions came about, and it also indicated to us who understood this that without restraints on just printing money when you need it, the politicians would spend money and then print the money. And that's what we've been doing for 40 years. So you might ask, well, they've done it for 40 years. It must have worked pretty well. The whole thing didn't fall apart. But it took us 40 years to get to where we are today. Because in the early 1970s, we were the creditor nation. We were the rich nation. We had the jobs. We had the industry. And others owed us money. But today, our good jobs have gone overseas. We are a poorer country. Our middle class is poorer, and our debt is just unbelievable. Taxes can't be raised, even if you wanted to, because there's no money out there. You'll just destroy the economy if you try to do that. So we went from the richest nation as a creditor nation to a nation that owes more money than any country has ever owed in the history of the world. And the debt is the big problem. It's a worldwide debt. But it's all based on the dollar. The dollar is the standard, so everybody thinks the dollar can bail everybody else out. So we get to a point where a state needs bailed out, we bail out the states. Banks need bailed out, we bail out the banks. Corporations need bailed out, we bail out the corporation. But the situation is such that those on the inside get bailed out, and the middle class gets stuck with the bills. And this is what has this is what has become very clear to a lot of Americans now. This was something we should put aside and say, well, we have debt, but we're still doing well. Well, it's not going to be that way any longer. So in 2008, when the economic crisis hit, people started to realize that this is unsustainable, and something big is happening. So the system that was designed, the politicians are pretty shrewd. They spend money to get your vote, and then we won't worry about the payment later. How do they get the vote? Well, they always do good things, in quotes. They at least want you to believe they're going to. And I think a lot of them are very, very sincere. You take the housing crisis that we have. People really wanted people to have a house, which is a good incentive. I happen to believe if you want the maximum number of people to have a house, you ought to do it the old-fashioned way. Hard work, effort, pay, save your money, and build and pay for your house. I think that's the way we get the best. But no, we wanted an easy ride. So the Fed said, we'll create the money that you need. We'll pass out the money to the banks, and they can make these loans. And they'll be the loans will be guaranteed. Then it got out of control. The banks started speculating. They had derivatives, and there was gambling going on, and they got, they created a housing bubble. But when you pump a lot of money into an industry, people may get houses, but also the prices go up. Initially, people say, well, that's wonderful. My $100,000 house is worth $150,000, so I'll go out and borrow more money. So the whole thing went on for 20 years or so. So there was an obvious bubble there. So the bubble burst as was predicted, and guess what happened then? The people who were doing the most to gamble and making a lot of money, Wall Street and the big companies and the banks, they said, you know what? You better bail us out because there's a crisis coming, and there'll be a depression if you don't bail us out. So Congress rushes in, spends $1 trillion, Federal Reserve creates more money, and they bail out Wall Street. They bail out big corporations to the tune of trillions of dollars. And after they did that, the very people that were supposed to be helped with this program, the people who were supposed to get a house, they lost their jobs. They lost their houses, their lives, and their mortgages. Our jobs are overseas, and it's unsustainable now. So this whole thing, even if the people were the best, they were very well intended, if it's a failed policy, this is what we get. I connect the economic problems along with our monetary system, because government grows, and we can get away with it with this idea that government can create money. This is why I have talked so much about the Federal Reserve. This is why I've worked so hard on auditing Federal Reserve. And I am very pleased to tell you, with a lot of help from people like you, we were able to get part of an audit of the Federal Reserve. So that means we're on the right track of finding out exactly how that system works. The Federal Reserve is bigger than the Congress when it comes to money because they do it in secret. There's no oversight. Congress created $1 trillion and spent $1 trillion bailing out the special interests, but the Fed created $15 trillion. 5 of it went to overseas banks. Just the other day when Bernanke had his press conference and where they talk a lot about the debt crisis in Europe, he said, we'll stand by, we're keeping an eye on it, and if necessary to keep the banks solvent, we're going to do it. The only tool they have is to print more money, but now the confidence is being lost. The dollar has been, the credit rating has been downgraded once, recently, and it's about ready to be downgraded again. Because our debt is too big. So in the summertime, people were starting to realize the crisis, and they figured, see, the liberal economists say that when you get into a recession, it's a lack of spending. Well, I don't buy into that. It's too much spending and too much debt. So they want more spending. Of course, that hit the limits on raising the national debt. So there was this crisis in the summer. There weren't enough members because of the Tea Party movement. New members came in, and they wouldn't vote like they have for 40 years just to raise the national debt. So they wouldn't do that, and so they postponed it, and the Congress couldn't agree on it. So what did they do? They created the Super Congress, 12 people who would all of a sudden have the wisdom of Solomon, and they'll get together, and they're going to come up with a solution. But just listen, I'm sure in the last few hours, I doubt if there was any good news coming out of that, the Super Committee, because they're not going to have a solution. The Congress won't, because they're not admitting the truth. The truth is that we're bankrupt, and this can't continue, and therefore we have to cut spending. And this is why AJ mentioned my program is asking for a modest cut in the first year. Cut $1 trillion. Show the people we're serious that we need to cut spending. But this, it seems like most of you understand the necessity for that, but it makes a lot of people nervous, and they figure, what's going to be cut? $1 trillion is a lot of money, and it is. Well, you do have to come up with priorities. And the reason I think we're forced to come up with priorities and work this way, because one thing for sure, we can't continue to do what we're doing. It will end badly. And it usually ends with, under these conditions, it ends up with a currency crisis, runaway inflation, and everybody suffers. That means the checks bounce. Yes, the government keeps printing money, but prices soar. Even today, those on retirement, fixed incomes, and Social Security, they are not keeping up with the cost of living. So their income is actually going down. Well, if we don't do something about it, that will be accelerated. It will be massive. And the more people need something, and the more the government tries to give it to them, the worse the problem will get. And that is why I think it's so important that we as a people come together and say the problem is too much government, too much spending, too much special interest. We have to cut something. So where are we going to start to cut? Well, I have a list of the priorities. And I think the top of the priority on where I would cut is all the overseas spending and welfare and foreign aid and all the activities. We should have a government designed to take care of us here at home. That is where I think we should start. Right now, there is no consideration for those cuts in Washington, either at the leadership of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. They are saying that is off limits. For instance, I've said for years now, and certainly in this campaign, I talk about saving money by bringing our troops home. Why are we in 135 countries? Why do we have 900 bases around the world? Why do we have troops in Korea? They've been there since I was in high school. We've been in Japan since World War II. We've been in Germany since that time. We subsidize their budgets, and we have wars that are going on. They're undeclared. This is why I say the way we should start is bring our troops home and stop these very clear about going to war. The war powers is not with the president. The president's responsibility in defending the country in emergency is imminent attack or an attack. You just defend the country. That's the responsibility of the commander-in-chief. But it's not the authority of a single person that can say, oh, you know, those Iraqis look like bad people, or the Iranians look like bad people, and we're going to go war, and we'll get support by telling us a few stories about what isn't true. The stuff that we were told about Iraq just wasn't true. You know, they did not have weapons of mass destruction. The Al-Qaeda was not there. There was no people in Iraq that was had anything to do with 9/11. But the president made authority, and the Congress reneged on their responsibility. And we should do this much more cautiously. But instead of bringing troops home and being cautious about getting involved in a war, our current president has gotten us involved in Libya right now, with no authority given to him whatsoever. Already we've spent over $1 trillion, and that war isn't over. I mean, it's more disruptive now. It has set the stage for the Al-Qaeda actually to go into Libya. They weren't there before. As bad as some of these guys are over there, they sometimes have kept out some of the people like Al-Qaeda and Taliban on their own. But that is the problem that we have. We haven't reversed this, but the president not only has taken upon himself to get us more involved and expand the war in Afghanistan, now over 10 years, but he has just announced, he's over in the Far East right now, he just announced that he's sending thousands of troops to Australia. Why do you have to pay for troops to go to Australia? And the argument he has is, well, you got to watch out for China. China's our banker. What do they want to attack us for? We have to pay our bills. You know, the irony of this is that we're fighting and dying in all these wars over there, protect oil and who knows what. At the same time, the Chinese are selling us goods. Our jobs go overseas. We print the money. They take our dollars. Guess what they're doing with their dollars? They're investing in oil. They're investing in natural resources in Afghanistan and in Iran and these countries that we want to keep fighting with. The thing is turned on its head. So we should look to the Constitution for guidance. There is no authority for us to be the policeman of the world. A strong national defense is correct. And I really was hopeful in the year 2000 when our candidate at that time argued the case because he was disillusioned with Clinton's foreign policy. He says we should not be the nation should not be the policeman of the world. We should not be involved in nation building. We shouldn't be involved in these internal affairs. We should have a humble foreign policy. He says we shouldn't have an arrogant foreign policy. I think that is great stuff. I think the Constitution limits our activities. The money we have, since we don't have any, that limits it. The founders were explicit on this. They said that that we as a nation should try to be friends with people and try to trade with them and stay out of their business, stay out of their internal affairs, and don't get involved in entangling alliances. Even as recent as at the end of World War II, Mr. Republican Robert Taft argued the case of staying out of NATO. He says eventually what would happen is NATO will take us to war. NATO was set up to combat the Soviets. So the Soviets are gone, but we still have NATO growing and growing